but I'm still happy to connect to several points we have seen today, because I think it reflects my own observations from several projects. But jumping right in, so I have worked in several commission projects, but also published several articles in this area where some kind of clusters or some kind of ideas have been seen several times. And this is something I want to share with you today, also in connection to this question of good practice versus best practice. One start here is that many SMEs I talked to or had contact in the workshops and did interviews with is that if you talk about best practices, they're often too far away from many SMEs. The one thing we just saw in the Mentimeter was this question of low-hanging fruits, approachability, and this is something I can reflect on and have seen in many, many cases. So it's actually something I can confirm. So if you talk to SMEs, what do they hear? Build your own digital platform. Everything that can be digitized will be digitized, or something like set up your own AI system that analyzes your entire supply chain. This is all nice and true, and it's certainly a best practice on a long-term run for an SME, but it's nothing that is really approachable in the next 5 to 10 years, at least for many of the SMEs. So your own digital platform would mean that an SME is large enough to have a large set of suppliers, customers, which they actually, in many cases, don't have. So it's not really realistic for them. So the question of low-hanging fruits, approachability is one we often forget. Still, something I also see in many projects is that funding and support for SMEs often goes in the direction also politically driven. We want new things to happen. So if we help an SME, it's often not the top-notch, whatever kind of digitalization solution, but it may be something that is 5 years old for a large enterprise. It helps the SME a lot, but funding and political programs often go in a direction of like best practice, but not good practice, which are approachable to SMEs. Just to summarize, one aspect which is very important, not all SMEs are the same, which is kind of self-explanatory, but still I can't emphasize it enough, because you can see here it's a publication from colleagues of mine and me from Spanish SMEs, and we found there are actually quite different levels of digitization. So you can't put the SMEs which are more behind in the same observation or give them the same hints and programs than the leading SMEs. One thing to be discussed, and another thing, of course, is which industry sectors are they in? Where do they connect to? What is their kind of business model? Which supply chain are they active in? It completely defines on what level they are and what kind of good or best practice they need. Second insight I wanted to share with you is that if we talk about, for example, ERP system, enterprise resource planning, this is something we have not in many SMEs yet. Only 1/3 has it, whereas for large enterprise, they have it. In most cases, the same is true for robots. Many SMEs are actually cannot afford robots. It would be more than their annual turnover to buy one of those robots. So we have to kind of downgrade and downsize our best practice a little bit to a good practice to make this approachable for SMEs. So what can we actually do after this introduction? I will give you just some examples. Of course, the list is much longer, and we have already seen some examples today. But one aspect is actually that many SMEs have very good machinery, but it's not really ready for the digital world. So a huge business opportunity, but also support for them is how to make their existing production like fit for digital transformation or digital technologies in the current age. Often adding some sensors and some technologies to the machinery is enough. But on the other hand, you must keep in mind that a lot of funding, a lot of support programs are actually targeted in investing in new technologies. That's also what firms want to sell. So this is a bit of a problem here. Money, funding, venture capital, it all goes into new technologies like those nice best practices, but a best practice or a good practice is kind of a low-cost digitization. So supporting SMEs there is one key, but the other key is this term of frugal innovation. So innovation that is not like best, top-notch, but which is approachable, which is kind of low-cost, efficient. It's not what many firms want to sell to the customers, but it's what helps many SMEs. So connecting SMEs among them others, maybe also hubs only for SMEs or parts of hubs only for SMEs to make those technologies approachable is certainly one aspect which is very important. How to make small steps towards digitization and make their production more digitized and not buying a lot of new machinery, not affordable for most SMEs. One example which I kind of supervised myself is um, so-called downgraded student projects are often enough for many SMEs. So if you kind of want the top, here we see an augmented reality class in logistics processes. This is nice for research. It's also nice for many leading firms. But if you do this with older classes, which are cheaper, which are just sufficient for many cases, and if you do this with student groups, both side benefit, it's not the perfect solution, but it's good enough. It makes it more approachable. The students, it also attracts talent because they can see how it works in a company and so on. And on the other hand, it's really enough for many cases. Student projects I have seen as a good or really not even a good, but a best practice how to integrate technologies in SMEs. It's just more approachable. It saves costs, but on the same hand, it it integrates many good talents that might even start working there or at least interested in this. Further examples are that SMEs can combine their like shared interests or shared benefits. So, for example, on the top left, you see tools, machinery tools, which are often like equipped with diamonds and which are very expensive, thousands of euros or even more. Many SMEs don't need them every day, but maybe once a month or even less than that. So really innovative solutions how to share the tools are very easy to do with current technologies, but it's something we haven't seen that much so far. Of course, there are some providers who do it, but if you do this sharing of tools, of also capacities for tools, for machineries, this is certainly one way to do it. On the top right, I was just talking about capacities. You don't need like a perfect IT expert for any SME, but it makes sense if you have an expert on server, on remote maintenance or whatever, IT infrastructure, if there are ways to share it, and there are good examples to do this. So we don't need a perfect solution which is custom and like nice to show everyone, but we need one that works and which is approachable to each and everyone. So in the end, the idea here is that the companies can interconnect across the different fields and that they are kind of putting their common interests together and saving a lot of cost. It won't be the perfect tailored solution for each and every one, but it will be good enough in many cases. Same with talent acquisition. If SMEs like to cooperate among equals, among firms which are not driven by investors, but which are driven by common values, common negotiation power, common size. So like doing it together to attract talent, also in the student project. It's also a good way. And finally, one thing we saw as in the gap analysis last time is broadband internet access. If there is SME in a remote location, in many cases, the problem is it's not really approachable for them to get broadband internet access because one SME is just too small to afford it. The internet providers are not interested in it. But if many SMEs or several SMEs, like an industrial park or whatever, if they come and jointly say, we need this, then it can work. So putting this together makes sense in the end. So to summarize, good is often better for SMEs than best to make practices approachable. So small steps, making retrofitting of existing machinery, talking how to do it on a low cost way and not on a way which is good for marketing purposes or political programs who want to highlight that they're like leading. The second one is what might be outdated for large firms is still good enough for many SMEs, but it doesn't attract funding or interest on the market. Still, it's good enough to bring them there. And third, nevertheless, the long-term goal should not be forgotten. So small steps, low-hanging fruits are interesting and are the right way for many SMEs, but some SMEs which are leading, which offer a certain technology, they still need to consider moving right into like the best practices, the leading technology. So I don't want to say for each and every SME, top technology is not the right one, but for many of them, it's actually a way to get there. So long story short, we need like good practices for SMEs, which they feel connected to, which make them approachable for them, and not only like the technology, which is nice for marketing, nice for attracting investment, nice for highlighting it in political programs, but we need something more approachable, so good, not only bad in this regard. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.